Trend likes to position this event as a technical thought leadership, a learning exercise, so I'm not going to do too much product messaging today. Right? This really is about the evolution of vulnerability management into what Tenable terms cyber exposure, Gartner terms risk-based vulnerability management. It's really taking what is relatively quite a mature industry and quite a mature piece of technology and evolving it to the next level. And there's a number of reasons that we need to do that, and that's basically because all of your existing IT infrastructure is transforming. All right, so as every organization is running business transformation, running digital projects, you've got cloud, you've got containers, you've got IoT, we have the aggregation and the addition of industrial technology and the integration of that with your IT infrastructure. So a lot of things are changing, and the attack surface is growing. All right, so hopefully this should be interesting and relevant for you all, right? If not, feel free to complain. I'm here for you. Now, this is a quote from a guy, the CEO of Box.com, be on a mission that doesn't suck. Right? And I would like to think that we all operating in IT security these days are on exactly that. And the reason is because cybersecurity, in the absence of an actual physical war, this is the existential threat of our time. Right? So for us, we working together, vendors, practitioners, we're here to keep the world operating smoothly and keep people safe. We've all heard about Equifax, I'm sure. The hits keep coming with this one. This is from a recent article, by which stage, after a little bit over 12 months after the initial cyber attack, the damage to the organization has exceeded $1.4 billion US. Right, so one simple cyber attack that was, regrettably, entirely preventable has had an enormous amount of business damage to one organization. People have been fired, there are regulatory fines, the brand damage is awful, and they're having to continue to pay out for identity theft protection for all of the affected people. So at an organizational level, that's a potential risk, and nobody wants to have that happen to you. But it gets worse. These days, everyone's car has 30 to 40 computers in it. Right? Everyone's hospital, all the medical equipment, the blood pressure monitors, heart rate monitors, all the diagnostic equipment is all connected to the network. There is a very real risk that if these kind of organizations get hacked, people may die. Right? This is entirely possible. In a similar kind of way, with the Russians hacking the American energy grid and so on, they're actually very good at that. That's how they invaded the Crimea. 24 hours before the tanks rolled in, they turned out the lights. Right? This is how countries conduct war these days. So this is the threat that we're all here to face and hopefully to solve. Now, today's big problem is that everybody is getting attacked. And in many cases, as per a statistic we see here from a report that we did late last year with the Ponemon Institute, the success rate of these attacks is alarmingly high. Now, why is that? Why is it so easy for people to attack? Well, I've got a little analogy here that some of you, with a bit of colorful background in your past, might recognize what's going on. And obviously, this is a real potential risk. Right? Now, obviously, these cars are not very secure. Right? But this is a nice physical world parallel that kind of highlights the nature of the real problem that we face today. And that is the fact that literally anybody armed with the right tools and the knowledge of how to use them can quickly and easily penetrate any target. Unfortunately, this is exactly what we face today in the field of IT. Now, there are a number of ways that we could go and address that. You could put every vehicle inside its own fortress. That is one potential approach to take to try and keep things safe. However, Cost, scale, time, etc., probably not appropriate. You could try and arrest anyone who has a screwdriver. Right? Again, that might be doable, right? But it's probably not the right approach to take. Right? You could ban all screwdrivers. Again, maybe it'll work, but is it scalable? Is it sensible? And is it effective? Probably not. So let's focus on helping you solve the right problem. Now, the gentleman from AWS mentioned about vulnerabilities. If you were listening, you would have heard that over and over again during that presentation. And we've heard that in the keynotes and in various other things. So let's just look at what they are and why they're important. To do this, let's look at how attackers actually operate. Now, the first thing that they need to do is discover a vulnerable system. Now, Shodan.io is one such tool. There are tools available that can scan the entire global internet in 45 minutes. It's not hard to find a target. The next thing they'll do is run a piece of malware, ransomware, etc., something like a WannaCry, to attack that vulnerable host. And then once they've broken in, they can take control, steal your data, encrypt it, etc., etc. This is, at a high level, how attackers operate. Now, the malware and the ransomware is what all the headline news stories tend to focus on, because it's easy to give them names. And I've put a couple up here that you may well recognize from some of the recent headline incidents. 3 or 4 years ago, it used to be quite difficult to explain to people what Tenable did. Nowadays, with the prevalence of these major global front-page news articles focusing on these things, it's actually much easier to do my job. But one thing that frequent scanning of the media does tend to indicate is that there isn't yet really a strong correlation in most people's minds between the malware and the ransomware and vulnerabilities. Because the malware and the ransomware are simply computer programs that have been written to target a vulnerability. Now, a vulnerability is a software bug or weak point, not the really obvious ones. These are not blue screen of death type things, but they're weak points that can be exploited in order for an attacker to enter a system and gain control. Now, unfortunately, everything is software these days. Right? Your computer, your laptop alone probably has 2 million lines of code on it. And so vulnerabilities may exist at the operating system, hypervisor, application, database, JavaScript, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Right? So there do tend to be lots of them. Now, if we want to remove the threat, if we want to address these problems, just like with the cars, there are a number of different approaches that we could take. And there are quite a few vendors that would have you out there trying to address each and every one of the, say, 30 million executable instances of AI obfuscated malware. Right? There are vendors selling products that address that space. They do a pretty good job in marketing it, making you worried about that. That is one possible approach to take. I don't know about you, though. I'm pretty lazy. I'd rather go after something a bit more manageable, perhaps something like the 300 families of malware from which the individual executable instances have been developed. Scalable, probably a bit more effective, but that's also complex because of the obfuscation that occurs. It's a constant arms race between the antivirus companies and the pro-virus companies. Now, again, I'm very lazy. I personally would rather go after the 3 vulnerabilities that all of these executable instances, all of these families of malware target. Right? I think that is a much more manageable, scalable approach to take. So solve the right problem. If you eliminate the vulnerabilities, then you can ignore the malware, the ransomware, the virus, the endpoint attack, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Okay? Now, if that was all it was, you could all follow me outside and sign a purchase order, and then we could all go home. Right? Unfortunately, it's still a little bit more complex because of the nature of IT in this day and age, the expansion of the attack surface, and the simple number of vulnerabilities that are out there. All right, so as an example, Tenable, we're a global company of about 1,500 people worldwide. Internally, with everything that we're doing, is in cloud containers, lots of development stuff, we've got probably 15,000 IT assets. And of that, maybe 100,000 vulnerabilities. Right? Now, these aren't all critical, leverageable, exploitable ones, public-facing and so on. But that gives you an idea of the kind of scale of the issue. All right, so we knew we needed to do something to address that. Otherwise, this critical foundational cyber control will not be able to be implemented effectively. Now, always like to have a little independent third-party justification here. Our friends from Gartner had quite a nice thing to say about this. They said, through 2021, the single most impactful enterprise activity to improve security will be mitigating vulnerabilities. Thank you, Gartner. Nice to know that we're on the right track. Now, the question is, how do we go about doing this? All right. Now, the approach that Tenable has taken, again, this is pretty much the one product slide that I have, is what we call cyber exposure. Now, cyber exposure is built upon the foundation of vulnerability scanning and management. Right? So probably 3/4 of the people here who work in cybersecurity at some point in your career will have used Nessus. All right? I see a bunch of heads nodding. Nessus is the global standard for vulnerability scanning and management. And Nessus is great for a small company. Right? So the approach that Tenable has taken is, upon the foundation of Nessus, is to build a series of enterprise-grade platforms to solve the scaling problem, to give you trending, analytics, regulatory compliance reporting, and rich business context. Now, we've been doing this for a good number of years now, and the latest evolution is what we call cyber exposure, where we're adding in data science-driven insights, business context and translation in order to deliver business KPIs and things like key risk indicators, so that you can make informed decisions about where you invest your cybersecurity budget and your time. Really, cyber exposure is about answering these 4 key questions. Where are we exposed? Just being careful. What should we focus on first? How are we reducing our exposure over time? And then the latest really cool innovation is all about benchmarking. Right? You want to know how you compare to your peers. Right? Because we have a cloud-based solution, we get access to, opt-in, anonymized metadata, so we can tell what people are doing, what they're scanning, how frequently they're scanning, whether they're finding vulnerabilities, if so, how many and how frequently, and do they get rid of them quickly? Do they reappear? There's a great deal of actionable intelligence that we can gather from our global viewpoint. And the Tenable security research team is publishing papers all about this. It's very, very cool. The attacker's advantage is one such, where we learned that attackers, on average, have a 7-day advantage over the cyber defenders. All right? So this is not a month, this is not 3 months, 7 days is the advantage. And in our next white paper we call the Cyber Defender Strategies Report, we told you what you should be doing to address that gap. Highly recommended if you would like to have a read and learn the specific actions that you and your organization can do to be at the world's cutting edge and leading best practice. So that's cyber exposure. Now, more concretely, why did we have to expand upon plain old, basic old vulnerability assessment with Nessus? Well, firstly, because you can't take a pencil and paper and draw a network diagram anymore. Right? Those days are long gone. 20 years ago, I worked at Telstra. That used to be possible. Nowadays, not so much. And you've heard from the other presenters today about, and even the survey results, which were really interesting, about people being focused on cloud and worrying about threats from shadow IT. And I was quite surprised here in Australia to hear how many people were worried about the threat for industrial infrastructure. Right? It really is a sign that the market is maturing, and IT, as we know it, is transforming significantly. So what do we do about that? Well, firstly, vulnerability assessment. It's all about being able to discover your assets, because you can't secure what you can't see. Right? So ad hoc scanning of traditional assets, giving you basic visibility so you can discover it and then remediate the problems that you find. All right? This is Nessus. It's the global standard with 2 million worldwide users, and it's been doing a great job of that for 20 years. All right? Now, the problem that Nessus alone faces is that it's a periodic action. It's like taking a Polaroid picture snapshot of your security posture. Right? It's like going to the bank. When you go to the bank, they don't have a sign on the window saying, patrolled by armed guards every second Thursday. Right? So there is definitely a way to make this a little bit better. And we've been continuing to drive innovation here. So active scanning. Tenable's also the first in what we call passive scanning, where we look at network traffic and look for anomalous behavior. And also on-host scanning. So for things like servers where you don't want network traffic for the scan across the core of the network, or mobile devices like laptops, which are not always on, and so won't be discovered in a periodic scanning fashion. Right? So these are 3 things that we've done to help. One of the latest innovations that's actually really cool that we've added in is what we call live results. So typically, we've got 300 software engineers that are punching out updates and adding vulnerability scans into the database. It's pushed out worldwide every 24 hours. Right? Now, most people use Nessus on a weekly, monthly basis, something like that. Leading best practice would be every 2 days in this current era. But there's still some gap between the actual scans. Right? So with the addition of the ability to have live results, when we update the Nessus scan database, it will look at what it's already got, and it will alert you if there are any new problems that have been found inside the existing records without having to wait for the next periodic scan. Again, cool feature. Now, vulnerability management. Right? This is building upon the foundation of that periodic point-in-time scan. So we've done things like adding in automated assessment to make it easier and less laborious for you to run these scans and analyze the results. We've expanded the footprint so that we can cover the kind of IT infrastructure that you yourselves have in this day and age. Right? It's absolutely not in our position to dictate to you what you can and can't do with your IT infrastructure. We as a vendor, if we want to keep selling anything to anyone, we have to keep up and make sure that we can cover whatever you have and wherever you want to put it and whatever flavor it is that you want. Physical, virtual, cloud, container, serverless, etc. And predictive prioritization is the biggest development in the space in a decade. I'll get to that in more detail in a moment. Now, these are examples of the non-traditional IT assets. Right? A lot of people have been developing, deploying these, even some very large organizations right here in Australia are charging off down the path. Tenable internally, these days we're by default, like most modern organizations, we're kind of cloud first in what we do. And our software developers are always looking at the latest generation technologies, Kubernetes and Docker and various other flavors of DevOps type things. And we have to keep ourselves safe so that we can keep our customers safe too. Right? So internally, our CISO, Bob Huber, great guy, was just in Sydney last week. He has a lot on his plate. Right? And so for us in our product management team, we listen to people like that, people who are responsible for keeping us and all of our infrastructure, and by extension, people like the US Department of Defense who use our products, keeping us all safe. And this continues to grow and evolve. Industrial security, again, from the survey results earlier, big priority here in Australia. right? Energy, transport, manufacturing, utilities. There are lots and lots of different types of scenario where, you know, the guys with the hard hats are now having to wonder about IT security, right? So these are two completely different worlds, and people are mashing them up. What could go wrong? Let's try and keep that safe. Now, as the variety of infrastructure continues to expand, unfortunately, so too do the total number of vulnerabilities discovered, right? So what we're really facing is an n-squared scaling challenge that unfortunately tends to make vulnerability scanning and management, which is such a mandatory foundational cyber defense, it makes it very difficult. So here are some numbers. 16,500 were the total number of vulnerabilities disclosed just last year. Right? The current Nessus scan database has over 130,000 CVEs in there, and we continue to add somewhere between 1,000 to 3,000 more every month. Right? So as these things are being discovered, we're pushing it out into the database to help keep you safe. But it is a scaling problem. Now, if all we did was base the risk on the CVSS score, right, what you'll see is nearly 60% of them were considered high or critical, right? And 15% of that, which is still over 2,500, were at a level of 9+ out of 10. Right? So very, very large numbers. It's like having the fire alarm go off in your building 5 times a day. Right? Who wants that? Now, the good news, relatively, is that only 7% of the vulnerabilities disclosed have publicly available exploit code developed. Okay? So the point we're getting at here is that if we use a bit of smarts, if we add in a little bit of threat intelligence here, what we've been able to do is to develop what we call predictive prioritization, where we're able to eliminate 97% of all of the noise from your VM program so that you can focus on that critical 3% of the vulnerabilities that pose the greatest risk to your business right now. Right? So this is the biggest innovation that anybody has delivered in the space in a very long time, and it's very exciting. Every customer I've spoken to here in Australia, we gave it away free. Right? I think we might have done ourselves a little bit of a disservice there. But every single customer who's seen it has said, thanks, that's awesome. I can go home and see my family now. Thank you. Giving me back my weekend. Now, how that works is we've added in 2 categories, what we call VPR. This is our version of the vulnerability scoring that incorporates threat intelligence feeds from 150 separate data elements. Right, from people like Recorded Future, we've got people who speak Russian who are on the monitoring the Russian hacker forums, and antivirus feeds from all the other vendors in the market, and so on, and so on, and so on. Right? So essentially we say, combine that with what we call the asset criticality rating. So we can bring in info from your CMDB, or we can automatically populate, based upon the nature of the infrastructure. We want to identify the IT assets that you have that are most critical to the business so that you can keep them safe first. Right? So the combination of threat intelligence and automated asset criticality determination eliminates most of the vulnerabilities, just leaving that critical 3%. We tell you, fix those right now. Right? And then you can go to lunch. Right? And when you're done, get to that long tail of the rest of the vulnerabilities if you need to, when you can. Right? And you kind of rinse and repeat that. Bob's your uncle. You don't have to believe me, though, but these guys tend to think we're on the right track. Right? Now, Gartner, by 2022, organizations that use risk-based vulnerability management will suffer 80% fewer breaches. That sounds good to me. Nobody wants to be in the headlines for all the wrong reasons. Let's help keep you out. Now, in conversations with a lot of people at events like this, they'll come and see us at the booth, they'll get a good understanding of the products and the technology, and oftentimes a question that people ask is, yes, you give us a lot of information here, that's very interesting, reporting and so on, thanks, but can you actually fix anything? Right? And the answer is kind of yes and no. Right? So we ourselves do not do patch management. However, we're a software company, and sharing is caring. Right? We're all about being able to help you use the information that we give you wherever you want to put it. Right? So as a software company, we have SDKs and we have APIs, so we can bring data in from other security infrastructure and other scanning tools, other data sources, CMDBs like Splunk and so on. And we can also pipe it out as well. So here's an example of some of the technology integration partners that we have. Tenable has been around for quite some time, and so there are quite a few of these. But particularly on the fixing side, since vulnerability management really is about patching things when you come down to it. And most organizations prefer to test before they roll out new patches. Right? It's sensible. Right? And in some cases, you can't patch things. Right? Old versions of applications and old versions of Java or something like that, you just can't patch everything. And most things you can't patch except on a repetitive, agreed cycle. Right. And in many cases, the security people who are finding the problems are not the people who own the servers and the applications, so you have to work cooperatively between departments. Now, if your organization has, say, a 3-monthly or a 6-monthly, God forbid, an annual patch cycle, it does happen, that can pose an enormous amount of risk. Right? Don't be an Equifax who knew about the Apache Struts vulnerability 6 months before they got hacked. Don't do that. Right? Now, the good news is we have friends. Right? And we're here today at the Trend Micro Cloud Security Show, thank you, Trend, because we love Trend Micro. Right? Because with the tipping point IPS system, what we're able to do is program it. So Tenable will scan and locate vulnerable systems inside your infrastructure. We can then take that scan data, export it via our API, and set up a set of virtual patching rules inside the IPS. That's an awesome solution. Right? And again, customers here in Australia are using this to great effect to give them very, very quick resolution to critical exposed vulnerabilities. Right? And by doing things in this way, we enable them to keep that activity self-contained within the security department, so they can send the IT operations team or the server administrator, they can send them a memo and they can get to it when they need to. Right? This is a fantastic way of building trust and cooperation and operating smoothly within an organization. And so on that note, I'd like to say thank you all very much for your time. All right?